I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a series of events related to the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Earlier this month, a peace summit was held in Paris, where 70 countries, including the United States, represented by Secretary of State Kerry, discussed how to restart peace negotiations. Significantly, neither Israel nor the Palestinians were represented at the peace summit. But French President François Hollande warned that if there is no peace process leading to a two-state solution, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict threatens to have detrimental effects on the rest of the region. The peace conference also emphasized that neither Israel nor the Palestinians should take unilateral action on the conflict. And perhaps most important of all, the peace summit welcomed the December resolution of 2334 at the United Nations Security Council, which defined every Jewish community on the east side of the Green Line as illegal and a flagrant violation of international law, which of course is the other event in the news which continues to stir debate and controversy, namely the Obama administration's decision to withhold its normal veto of anti-Israel resolutions in the Security Council and to permit the resolution to pass 14-0. Well, what's it all mean? Why is there no peace process today? And does the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict have a detrimental effect on the rest of the Middle East? For some answers and perspective, we turn to our JBS phones to speak to an individual who's been studying the way in which antisemitism has been a driving force in the Middle East and a force that has blocked any peace process. A good friend, Dr. Charles Small, founding director of ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Charles, it's wonderful to speak with you again on JBS.
I'm honored to be with you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Charles, let's discuss the two recent events relating to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and a two-state solution one by one. First, President Obama's decision to permit a resolution slamming Israel and defining every Jewish community beyond the Green Line as illegal, including the Old City of Jerusalem, the Western Wall, the suburban cities which ring Jerusalem, such as Efrat and Ma'ale Adumim, and the Jewish communities in East Jerusalem like Gilo and French Hill. The president's decision to refrain from exercising an American veto permitted the UN Security Council to label and define all of them as flagrant violations of international law. Charles, how do you react to the president's action, and what do you make of the resolution?
So the president's reaction, or what the Obama administration did in an unprecedented manner, just weeks before the transfer of power to the Trump administration, they altered American foreign policy that both Democrats and Republicans have been pursuing for many decades. So to do this at the last minute and to give $225 million to the Palestinian Authority at the last moment, apparently just days before the transition, speaks volumes and puts into perspective the Obama administration's Middle East policy, if we can call it a policy. And I think that the impact and the effects on the Middle East, it will just serve to put more fuel on the catastrophe at what's befalling the Middle East. And it is, in my view, astounding. I believe in a two-state solution. I think the only way for there to be peace will be to have compromises by Israelis and Palestinians negotiating face-to-face. So I'm not a staunch supporter of occupation in quotations, but I think that both sides have to compromise, and the Israelis ought to transfer some land for peace and mutual recognition. But the issue to me is what's taking place on the other side of the Green Line. There's a genocide, and I'm using my words carefully, taking place in Syria as we speak, just not very far from the West Bank and from Jerusalem. On the other side of the Green Line are reactionary social forces that are anti-Semitic, homophobic, subjugates women, kills minority, drives Christians out of the region, and the administration has been empowering some of those forces. And I think to put an ally at risk in the face of a anti-Semitic, anti-democratic reality on their borders is rather pathetic. And I think history will judge this administration harshly, and I think the fact that the administration went so far as calling Jerusalem a settlement is amazing. Mm-hmm. And I think history will judge very clearly the implications of this event and this resolution.
Okay. Charles, I want to make sure everybody understands a couple of things about you. First, you are a Canadian citizen, correct?
I'm a Canadian and I'm a proud Israeli citizen.
Okay. You are not an American citizen?
Correct.
You don't vote in American elections?
No, I don't.
Okay. At the same time, you're, as you say, you are an Israeli citizen, you're a committed Jew, you are, by the way, passionate for democracy, a certain kind of liberalism, and you are a watchdog of anti-Semitism throughout the world. Have I defined you correctly?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. You've also appeared many times with me on JBS, and you've tried to define what bothers you about the Obama administration. And the comments you just made really reflect something that you've been saying to us for years.
Since the Cairo speech, since 2009.
Okay, and remind us what the Cairo speech is, and why was that such an important signal for you about the dangers you felt were inherent for Israel in the Obama administration?
So I think, first of all, I would urge all of your listeners to Google Barack Obama's Cairo speech in 2009. You can watch it on YouTube very easily. And what disturbed me was several things. One, to the chagrin of the Egyptian regime who was hosting him, he invited as honored guests the Muslim Brotherhood to his keynote speech.
Yes.
And it infuriated the regime in Egypt to the point where Mubarak and the leaders of Egypt refused to attend the president's address. So that should be put into context. To invite the Muslim Brotherhood as honored guests of an American administration, the Muslim Brotherhood literally calls for the extermination of Jews, a war against the Jews, that all the evil that exists in the world is the fault of the Jews. The Muslim Brotherhood takes Nazi propaganda and infuses it as its core ideology. It's not the rantings and ravings of the extreme wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, but it's a core belief. And for the President of the United States to invite them as honored guests, that was one red flag, to say the least. And we can see the mayhem that the administration's support of the Brotherhood in Egypt, in Libya, and other places in the region has caused. The death and destruction 7-8 years later is staggering. And we saw the beginning of this catastrophe in the Cairo speech. And number two, in his speech, he called for peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians and for democratic forces. He did not refer to a Jewish narrative and our connection, the Jewish people's connection to Israel, to the land of Israel. Rather, he justified Israel's existence because of the Holocaust. And I've argued with leaders of our community, with the esteemed Professor Alan Dershowitz, and I said we cannot accept the fact that the Obama administration and Obama himself does not pay tribute, does not connect to the Jewish connection to the land of Israel. Rather, he was making statements saying that we should have peace with Israel and Palestinians, and that the Palestinians should be kind to the Jews and the Israelis because of the Holocaust, not because of our connection to the land of Israel. And this was in my view, a warning sign of where Obama was coming from intellectually and ideologically. His connection to Edward Said, his connection to Rashid Khalili, his connection to other intellectuals on the extreme left, but also in the extreme Muslim Brotherhood kind of milieu, that this was consistent with a denial of Israel's right to exist in the Middle East. So that was two warning signs. And of course, he was calling for democracy and civil rights, and just days after his speech in Cairo, heroes of the resistance of the Iranian against the Iranian regime, citizens in Iran fighting for democracy, came out onto the streets in the millions, risking their lives, singing Obama's name, which in Persian is a play on words, and it's referring to the coming of an angel. And they were singing Obama's name. And the administration turned their back on the democratic forces who were on the street fighting the regime. There was carnage on the streets of Iran, and the American administration was quiet. And we know now that this was the beginning of a shift in American policy where the Obama administration, and I'm choosing my words carefully, supports the regime. The transfer of billions and billions of dollars and major contracts with Western and American and European companies as a result of the nuclear weapons agreement. This was the beginning of a rapprochement to a regime that is genocidal in its anti-Semitism. It wants to destroy Jews and destroy the United States of America, and yet the administration is now connected to them, and connected, not being as forceful as it ought to have been with the Assad regime, a great ally of Iran, and the suppression, the murder of hundreds of thousands of people in the region, the creation of more than 15 million refugees has destabilized the region. It's even destabilizing Europe. And I think the scholars who are looking at these shifts that were beginning in the Cairo speech to the result of where we are now, we saw the implications of this ideological worldview and the impact that was going to have not just on Israel but on the entire region, and now even into Europe. And it's extraordinarily alarming. And I think for the Obama administration to sort of put the last knife in, if you will, by not blocking this UN resolution and empowering the forces in the Middle East and anti-Semitic forces around the world, including in Europe, to view Jerusalem as a settlement is very alarming. It's very alarming. And I think when you see the bus attack, the ISIS-inspired bus attack in Jerusalem, after the resolution, we have to remember that now many people in the world, throughout the Middle East, governments in Europe, if Jerusalem is a settlement, and if an illegal occupying army is in Jerusalem, then perhaps, in some people's view, that bus attack is justified. Mm-hmm. Jews defending Jerusalem are now sort of an illegal equation, an illegal proposition. Mm-hmm. So the results of this are far-reaching, and I think that the damage that we have witnessed in the last 8 years and the emergence of hate and genocide and refugees is really a remarkable occurrence. And I think that we, who are not just Jewish or not just Democrat or Republican, but those of us who care about democratic principles and basic human rights, need to be very alarmed. And we have to also realize, Mark, I'll just say one more thing, that the roots of this hatred of the Muslim Brotherhood and radical Islamism, I've said earlier that they take their ideological heritage from the Nazis. So we have, in the United States and in other Western countries, we have engaged these Islamists. We've engaged the Muslim Brotherhood and the Iranian revolutionary regime, this ideology of anti-Semitic hate. We've engaged it, we've done business with it, we've legitimized it. But now we can also see in the United States those who adhere to those Nazi racist views are now beginning to perk up in the United States. The extremism associated with the change in the administration on the extreme right is empowering the nationalists and the so-called patriots in Europe. And the rejection of the other, the rejection of democratic institutions and processes, and the respect for citizens is becoming under more and more stress and strain. And I think that we in our community cannot tolerate the intolerance anymore.
Okay. Well, you say it so well. It's interesting. We had Dershowitz on a little while ago, recently. He said some of the same things about you, he said some of the same things about Obama that you said. And you know, Charles, in the Jewish community, there's enormous support and love for President Obama among, look, 70% or more of the Jewish community voted for Obama, 71% voted for Hillary. American Jewry is committed to the Democratic Party, and it doesn't seem to matter what the Democratic Party does or what President Obama does vis-a-vis Israel to the vast majority of American Jews who they're going to be annoyed, if not angered, by the comments you made. You want to make any statement at all about that dynamic of American Jewish life?
Sure. So first of all, I would start off by saying I agree with what you say, and I understand what you say to be true. And I think it's important for people to understand that I consider myself to be on the left. I lived, and I'm Canadian and an Israeli, and lived in Europe as well for many years. So I come from societies where health care is a human right. When I'm sick, I try to go back to my doctors in Montreal, even though I have great insurance in the United States, because the healthcare system, in my view, is better, because it's not a business. I went to McGill University, which is an Ivy League equivalent education in Montreal, for about $800 Canadian, which is probably $500 US per year. So I had an Ivy League education for a few $100s a year, because in Canada, education, and I would say as it ought to be, is a human right. So by American standards, my belief in strong citizenship and equality under the law is, I would say, I'm a proud social democrat. And that, to me, I think what we need to understand is, or to have a conversation in the United States, is what is liberalism? What is democratic principles? What is citizenship? What does it mean to be equal under the law? What is international human rights? Does a woman in Tehran have the same rights as a woman in Berkeley, California, for example? So I think we need to have serious discussions about democracy and citizenship. But so in a sense, what I'm saying is that I think we've lost sight of our liberalism, of true liberalism, and somehow the Democrat-Republican divide is all-consuming, and I think we've lost sight of our true beliefs. And I think that's an important issue that I think we need to be grappling with. And the other point I would say to American people supporting the Democratic Party, and I'm not calling them liberals because liberalism is, in my view, something different. The thing about anti-Semitism is that anti-Semitism begins with Jews, but it never ends with Jews. Anti-Semitism begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. Now, we have turned a collective blind eye to the anti-Semitism in the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East, and to the Iranian regime and the Syrian regime and its offspring of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And we have done deals. Boeing has done deals. Siemens has done deals. The P5+1, the United States and the European countries have done business deals with this horrific reactionary social movement, which is anti-Semitic, but they're also killing minorities and Christians and subjugating women and killing gay people. And any liberal would stand up against that. And our inability to stand up against that is now, in my view, ushering in an era of nationalism, the fear of the other in Europe, and it's coming here. It's coming to the United States. And it is time for liberals, people who care about democratic principles and citizenship, and who are against hatred of any kind, to stand up and not to tolerate it in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party and in our institutions of higher education and in the media of record. It's time for citizens to take a stand against this hate and the short-term political and economic agendas that are being driven by Western countries.
Okay, but I asked you to comment on the Jewish commitment, the overwhelming majority Jewish commitment, not simply to the Democratic Party, but to Barack Obama, after you described serious problems you had with his foreign policy as it relates to the Middle East. How does that relate to what you're just warning us about now, namely the need to protect this country and the world against hatred of the other? What did I say that made you think of that as the answer to my question? How do you respond to the commitment Jews have to Barack Obama?
So I think, what is the commitment based on? That would be my question. If the commitment is based, as I assumed in my response to you, liberal values and democratic values, then there are profound contradictions in the Obama administration's legacy to those values. And if the Jewish community is liberal, is ethical, and does stand up for the other and the acceptance of the other in our society, and it does stand with the Jews of Israel and the minorities of the Middle East, then these contradictions of the last 8 years and beyond the last 8 years are coming to the fore. And I think that the Jewish community, in my view, needs to really take stock of where we are at this moment. And does the political discourse in the United States, does the policy of the Democratic or Republican parties suit our ethics, our worldview, our politics, our communal politics? Where do we stand?
Yes.
And where do we take a position in vis-a-vis defending notions of citizenship, defending the rights of women, of gay people, of Christians, of Yazdis, and of Jews? Where do we stand? And I think that, growing up in Canada, we always looked to the United States, which was a, immensely more powerful country, and the Jewish community of the United States was always perceived by Canadians and other Jewish communities in the diaspora as the most powerful community in the world, the most powerful Jewish community in the world. And I think that we really need to take stock, because I'll tell you that a lot of diaspora communities around the world, in Canada and in Europe and in Australia and in South Africa, are looking to the United States. I think the Israelis have been looking to the United States, I would say, in bewilderment. Mm-hmm. What does the Jewish community stand for in the United States? Is it just for a political party? If that's the case, then all the power to the community. They're doing a great job. But if it is defending democratic principles, if it's defending citizenship, if it's standing against hatred of any kind against women or religious minorities or racial minorities and Jews, then I think the community has been sleeping through a revolution, in the words of Martin Luther King. We've been asleep.
All right, you understand that I think many people listening to you right now, watching you all over America, they're going to be saying, well, wait a minute, you're describing Donald Trump. And the Jewish community has been virulently anti-Trump because they see him as somebody who foments hatred and is misogynistic and is Islamophobic and is homophobic. And there are people in the Trump administration who are believed to be anti-Semitic and white supremacist. So it seems to me that people are going to hear you and think what you are saying is all the Democratic Jews who supported Hillary Clinton and are now just apoplectic over the election of Donald Trump, they're doing exactly what you want them to do.
No, so I would say that Donald Trump and the emergence of this sort of patriotic movement, or whatever you want to call it, the emergence of the alt-right and the sort of the fellow travelers of this campaign that Trump waged for the past year or more, I would say, and I've been saying this for a long time, that our silence against political Islam, not defending, the greatest victims of political Islam are Muslims. 500,000 exterminated in Syria, 14 million refugees fleeing their homes because of this genocide. And yet for 8 years, our communal leaders, our political leaders, the so-called liberal leaders refused to name the name of this hatred that was sweeping the Middle East and now is affecting Europe and the United States. And our silence and the vacuum that this created allows the Trumps of the world, the Le Pens of the world, and the other nationalists that will be emerging. Mark my words. If we have this conversation in 1 year, there'll be governments in Europe that are on the extreme right, and will be fellow travelers of President Trump. And it's our silence that allowed this vacuum to be created. And I'm telling you, tragically, there is a process that has been set in motion in part due to our silence that must be stopped.
Okay.
It has to be stopped in the Middle East, it has to be stopped in Europe, and it needs to be stopped here.
Okay.
There has to be an honest conversation about democratic ideals and what we as a community, what we as Americans or Western people living in democratic countries need to discuss and understand, because every generation needs to defend democracy and democratic principles, and we need to stand up to defend democratic principles.
All right. I literally have only a minute left with you. I could talk to you all day, and we will do that as soon as you're back in New York. But listen, Charles, one of the things that Trump says he's going to do is move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. There are people who are saying if we do that, it will inflame the Muslim world and provoke violence that will take the lives of Israelis. You've got 30 seconds or so. What do you think the United States should or should not do about moving the embassy to Jerusalem?
So I would simply say that that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. It's the only capital that the Jewish people have ever had in history for thousands of years. And I would argue that the governments that are represented in Israel ought to have their embassy in the capital like other countries. And this does not preclude a two-state solution. This doesn't preclude advancement of the peace process, but I think that the self-determination of the Jewish people is an important notion, as are the self-determination of other peoples.
Okay.
So I think by recognizing the deep, long history and culture of the Jewish people and our connection to Jerusalem, you read the Quran, you read the New Testament, and certainly the Torah, Jerusalem is Jerusalem. And
okay, Charles.
It's our capital, and the embassy should be there.
Charles, I'm out of town. Yes or no? Will it cost Israeli lives?
There's a holy war. Israel is the only other that has
yes or no?
in the region.
Charles, I'm almost out of time.
That want to destroy it.
Yes or no? Will it cost Israeli lives?
The existence of Israel is costing Israelis' lives.
Okay. Charles, I love you so much. I love you so much. What you're saying is so important for all of us to hear. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha. The minute you're back in the New York area, you've got to come and sit with me at the L'chaim table. In the meantime, you be well. You keep doing your work with ISGAP, and we'll talk again very soon.
Okay, all the success to you at JBS, and thank you for the honor of allowing me to be on your show. Thanks for all the good work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Charles Small, the founding director of ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Thanks to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Dara Golub, Dennis Golan, and John McDevitt. The producers of In the News, Carol Lilienthal and Ruth Golub. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.